Live. Guys, gals, everyone in between. Happy Friday before 4th of July weekend. Like, a lot of people are having like 5-day weekends. I gave our staff today off, so they got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And Wednesday, we're randomizing, though. Like I told them, look, we're back to work like we never left. We've got an excellent panel, all right, for those watching and listening. Robert Goldman. We have Dr. Fox. We have Chris Sauber. Chris Sauber, you're sponsored by someone, man. Are you getting sponsorships now? I
No,
noticed the
come on.
T-shirts connect.
This is an old studies T-shirt.
Oh, okay. I thought you're getting
Chris
some
doesn't need.
sponsorships.
He doesn't need. He's a legend in his own right. He's
In my own mind,
he's
maybe.
yeah.
I don't know about right.
in his own mind. Guys, we tried to get some females on too, but like Monica, Judy, Ashley, where you at? I mean, we want to get everyone. This is just a preview for I think it's going to have to be a necessary topic at SOS conference. This is why saveoursites.com is underneath February 2024, Tucson, Arizona. Let me just break it down real quick. Shared responsibilities. When the site is supposed to be responsible for protocol compliance, but also the CRA via the CRO via the CRA via all the other people at the CRO are also responsible. Both there's a risk that both assume, the other stakeholders taking care of it. So when both have this attitude, problems come up. And this is why we had Robert on. He's from the sponsor side to discuss this because we all know colleagues of ours at the sponsor side, especially the smaller biotechs, dealing with this very issue right now. Robert's a small sponsor, so we all talk. We've interviewed these people on before. And I think it's something that needs to be addressed. Like, CRAs are overworked, sites are overworked. So it's very natural for both to say, well, we're going to make sure we're not doing big things, but, we really are relying on the CRA to monitor. And then the CRA saying, well, I'm going to make sure I monitor big things, but it's really the PI's responsibility to make sure like these little things. So when both are saying that, what's happening? You got a mess. In this industry. So we had to get someone from the sponsor side to get on. And I knew no one better than Robert Goldman. So thank you, Robert, for sharing the sponsor side. And then myself, Chris, Dr. Fox, we're going to get from the site side. And look, save our sites. Sites are not angels. All right. Like we go on rants about sponsors, CROs, vendors. I'll be the first one to make a meme about all of them. But we can make memes about sites too, because they also are to blame. Chris and I talked to potential clients doing egregious things like controlling their PI's emails and e-signing contracts and keeping them in the dark about it. Like, what are we doing as an industry? So, with that preface, who wants to go first?
Yeah, where do we start?
I think Chris goes first. Chris is always like, sitting back,
Well,
analyzing
I'll
the
go last, thank
situation.
you.
He's very
Chris?
rational.
Who go first?
I think one thing that I could say is I have turned down sites from the network. Membership is free to CRPN, but
Bravo,
some
Dr.
of these
Fox.
sites, I would not allow these sites to have access to the sponsors that trust me. So it's a big reputation you have to think about. And some of the stories, and I'll just call it, they're site scams. There's site scams out there. You got to be real careful who you trust and who you sign a contract with, man. Like Dan said, there's sites that are not angels.
To say the least, man. But they don't last long. But some of them actually do, which is scary. And then the argument is, well, the CRAs that don't pay attention to details eventually get caught. The problem is there's such a demand for CRAs. Like, before they know they're gonna get caught, they just like move on. Resign and move on. I mean, this is like Emily brings up a perfect question. Like, what is the maximum number of protocols a CRA is supposed to monitor? There is no rule. Who makes these rules? Sponsor make it, I guess.
Well, I think the CRO actually makes it, Dan, right? I mean, depending on the demand, I've seen 4, 5 protocols under a senior principal CRA's belt before. zero point 0.1 FTE on this one, 0.3 on that one, another 0.2 there, then there are point. I mean, it's ridiculous, quite frankly. But the 0.1 FTE, 1 hour a week or 1 hour a day, I should say. It's a rare disease study that enrolls 5 patients over the whole life cycle of the study. So, but you're right. It's not a number that a sponsor really predicates because we don't control what the CROs do, considering the work is outsourced. But I can tell you firsthand, it's all the CROs who predicate what number of protocols CRAs undertake, and it's all based on experience. So as you rise the ranks, I don't want to say you're punished, but you're expected to take on, the amount of work that a principal or a senior CRA with X amount of years of experience in a therapeutic area has, then they give you that workload. And it's oftentimes very difficult to manage, it is.
So I think that could be manageable, honestly, if that CRA were only responsible for sites that had yet to enroll, right? And their
Sure.
primary function was to push sites, hey, enroll, right? That they're basically just motivating and a recruitment from a recruitment perspective. You could probably manage a dozen sites or a dozen studies that way, multiple sites, right? But if you have patients enrolled, that's a completely different story.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So I mean, being in study startup and getting sites off the ground, yeah, Chris, I mean, they could potentially take on 20 sites, across,
Multiple
5, 6 indications. But
Yeah.
yeah. Real quickly, huge shout out to James from Huxley Morton. He's viewing us. One of the
Love
best,
the guy.
one of the best recruiters in the industry. There's just no doubt about
The
that.
best. Absolutely 100% the best.
Couldn't agree more.
Not only the best recruiter, but the best brand maker that you know. I love this conversation. He
And
is
quality guy.
dumb.
I mean, just a quality person all around. Great personality,
Him and his
personable.
wife, superstar
Yeah.
team. I need to get them both on the
Genuinely
pod.
care. Yeah. So
Everyone on this panel agrees except Chris because he doesn't know him. Otherwise, he would agree
No
too.
clue who you guys are talking about.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
would know as well. But Chris is not on LinkedIn. Okay, so where do we start fixing this problem? Like SOS, I wanna discuss this, but I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, well, everyone just take responsibility. I think the workload is the issue. Well, there's a couple factors. There's workload, like genuine workload, but then there's also greed among sites and CROs, like filling the bucket past the maximum line because you don't want to hire another CRC or another sub-I. Jaime Valles, our sub-I at Yuma Clinical Trials, hats off to this guy. He really is like a semi PI on this stuff. Like he looks through inclusion, exclusion. He's like sub-I QA, especially with ConMeds. Like I've seen him take ownership of that. And when he gets into issues, he'll ask our PI, hey, what do you think about this? And they have a discussion. This is what you expect sites to do. But not every site wants to hire a sub-I and say, hey, get on this.
yeah.
Get on this level. And not every CRC is qualified, to be honest.
Now,
Yeah.
so Robert, I got a question, and okay, a couple lines here. You said a really interesting word. It always triggers something with me. You said the word assume, right? People just assume that they do things. Well, I always heard they always say when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me,
Right.
and that's so.
Nice.
My question to you is, and I've never seen this, but do you ever see an open and honest conversation between CRA and site saying these are the expectations between our relationship? Like, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I expect you to do.
I have seen it, but the problem is the delivery of that message, because it's always a he said, she said versus a hey, wait a minute, we're on the same side of the table and we should be sharing this responsibility together. So, when you start using words like, well, these are my expectations of you, there's this hierarchy built where the site kind of comes back and says, well, wait a minute, you're a guest here. You're not
Yeah.
going to come in and tell me what to do. And we're going to do so I guess it's all in the delivery.
The delivery. Yeah.
When you come in, those expectations of each other, the site's expectations of you when you're there, and your expectations of the site when you're there. For example, when I was a monitor, I would always come in and say, listen, I hate follow-up items. They are a burden to you. They're a burden to me. Let's set some time together. Let's agree together that no matter what the situation presents, obviously there's an exception to every rule, that we at least agree to put 30 minutes aside either before or after the visit so we can resolve these action items. So that way there's no work in between the visits when and if feasible. And like that's an expectation that you share and put in place together when you walk in the door. So these conversations oftentimes don't happen, and they need to happen because sometimes the CRA just doesn't know how to broach it, or they deliver it in the wrong manner and the site becomes resentful and they're like, well, wait a minute, you're not going to march in my door and tell me what I'm going to do. Like
So if I can interject right there.
please.
So, well, one, Dr. Fox, I think maybe you're approaching that at the wrong angle because the authority at the site's the PI. It's not the CRA, right? So the CRA shouldn't presume they're the authority, right? That's the wrong, at least in my opinion, wrong approach, right? PI is the authority at the site. What I think a good CRA should do, they don't necessarily have to be friends with people at the site, though I oftentimes find that the best CRAs are very friendly. But the approach should be just having a conversation. Hey, we're on the same side here. We want to make sure the data is clean, quality is good. That's what I'm here to do, is not to get you guys in trouble. That's furthest from what I want to do because it creates a headache for me, right, as a CRA. We're on the same team. I want to make sure you do a good job here. It makes my life easier if everything goes smoothly. I think that approach is really kind of what you're getting at, Dr. Fox, and that's really more what they should be in line with, right?
Maybe,
we're all on the same
maybe
team.
the
We're all here to
conversation
make sure this goes smoothly.
Well, what if it was more, okay, as a CRA, this is what I am not going to do. What if you did that?
Again,
Well, I mean, who's gonna say that though? Because you can,
again,
the
it just
site
comes
can
off
get
board.
mad. The site can get mad and call their lead when they get pissed and say, "Hey, this person told me that they're not gonna do these things already." Like, who wants to put their, like, look at this person, Karima. I had gotten burnt out working 7 oncology protocols and 15
Wow.
sites.
Wow.
And I realized my quality of work has decreased. I had to be vocal about being overburdened, which apparently no one listened to because she eventually left. So who's going to be on the record to say that to a CRC and then risk, okay, if the CRC doesn't like her or the CRC tells the site director, hey, this person told us they're not going to do this. Like,
well, I can almost guarantee a CRC is not going to like the CRA if they're being very demanding and very
that's for sure.
outlandish.
That's for
Guaranteed
sure.
they're not going to be liked, and they're going to complain, and they're going to say get rid of the CRA. Then that's going to reflect poorly on the CRA. That the CRA is not manageable or workable with most sites if that's their attitude, right?
So this is where greed is, I think, a culprit. Like these CROs, I mean, they don't want to hire help for this person. I don't think this person was on her own. She said, I left. So that means somebody was in charge. She was vocal about being overburdened. Either they couldn't hire someone, which I don't know. You can always hire someone if you want to. Or they just said, hey, keep doing it. We got profit margins. We've got stockholders to account for. And then in many ways, sites are doing the same thing with their CRCs and not wanting to train new staff and not wanting to bring on like educated people like nurse practitioners, RNs that know how to look into the details. A lot of times, like these colleagues of ours that are talking, Robert, from biotechs, I don't think there's like scientific trained coordinators running these sites. Like,
Right.
MAs, CNA. Okay, some of them. I mean, they end up knowing like meds and things like that. But what about having a RN supervision, NP supervision? Give them some equity. Give the NP like we did with Jaime. We give an
Yeah.
NP equity.
I mean, guys, look, it's a symbiotic relationship between site and CRA, or at least it should be. You know, I mean, it's I scratch your back, you scratch my back. So that means, I get it. Sites have multiple amounts of protocols simultaneously going. I mean, I've seen sites with 40, 50 studies going on, I mean, literally in a single time point. I refer to those as the mills, and some of them actually do it
Making
well,
bank.
making bank. That's fine. As long as the
Private
patient
equity.
safety, yeah. But if the patient safety and the data quality is
Hey, buddy.
there, it is what it is. But what I'm trying to say here is that it's it's when the site takes on more than they can chew, and the site expects the CRA to find every problem that they may have, and or the CRA expects, like you mentioned, Dan, the PI, well, if they don't follow it, then it's their fault, and everyone's pointing the finger at each other instead of saying, wait a minute, pull out the mirror and look at the person in the mirror, and don't deflect accountability and responsibility to other people. And I think if we stop doing that and we all say, hey, we're in this together, we're working towards a common goal. I made an error, you made an error. Let's call it a comedy of errors, and we fix it. We learn from the mistake, as opposed to sweeping it under the rug. And well, now it's the sponsor's fault, it's the CRO's fault, it's the site's fault, it's the PI's fault, the vendor's fault. That's what everybody is so used to doing. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but that's
No,
what
agree.
I've seen, all the time. It's never like, hey, site, and I love sites. Everybody on this call knows that. But I've never had a site say, you're right. We misunderstood. We're gonna redocument the training. It's no. Well, we've had X amount of on-site visits. We've had X amount of remote visits, and nobody brought this to our attention. That's not the response that we should be giving when an issue is detected, especially when
Right.
patient safety is at stake.
What about your
right?
own QA team internally at the
There you
site?
go.
Exactly. I was
We
gonna say
have
the same
one.
thing.
We have our coordinators do it. If it's not them, it's me or it's Jaime. Somebody's do it. Before every rando. We're still small enough. Before every rando, either myself or Jaime triple checks. And we've had a monitor tell me, "Thank you for doing that," because there were
Yep.
some things that had to get documented in order for this patient to get randomized, and I saw that you did that. Thank you. Like so, but what happens when these sites are PE owned, PE backed? Private equity is what I mean, not
Yep.
physical exam. Private equity
Yep.
owned and operated,
I-
and IRB owned and operated.
So Dan, there are sites that rely on CRAs to be their first line of QA defense, and that's where it goes wrong. So they're trying to shift that cost of QA over to the CRA, where the CRA should be like that. When you get a monitoring visit, that CRA should be looking at polished source data that has been reviewed, re-reviewed, make sure everything is done. And
Yep.
that's not what's
Yep.
happening. And your reference to PE, I think, is really effective. They're trying to make the most money out of the trials that they can for an exit strategy. So
Right.
they're not putting the resources in for the quality.
The problem is you get big enough, like what I just said about my site, UMaClinic, like we're not perfect either. We make mistakes. But we put the effort, like we have somebody trying to do QA. Look before every rando, like did we make sure? And if then it's either my fault or someone else's fault, drop the ball. But you have like these bigger sites, they get to the point where they receive a reputation. And so they're like, okay, we're good now to get any study. They love us. Now they go crazy with scaling. And that site that received that reputation is not the same site that's doing all this scaling.
Yep.
Like what got them there is not what's going to get them to the next place. But they use that as equity in order to kind of cut corner. I don't know if it's cut corner, but I mean, ultimately it is. Like I don't. We're trying to figure out like how we can fix this, but I think it boils down to just money, like everything.
So, Robert, from a sponsor's point of view, what do you see as far as the partnerships between CROs and sites? Like, what do you expect?
I expect everyone to hold up their end of the bargain. Like I say, these are human beings. These aren't gerbils, you know? I mean, and if it was my loved one, and I don't care if it's a new molecular entity, if it's a new first-in-class drug that's never been approved before, or it's a prodrug or a reformulation of a drug that we have decades of safety data on. Every person who is a volunteer to better humanity should be treated with the same respect and the same rights as any other patient, whether they're in a rare disease study or they're in a diabetes study. Everybody deserves that oversight from the PI who is obligated based on the obligations on the back of the 1572, which oftentimes, honestly, if you polled PIs, I'm willing to bet they can't recite 4 out of the 8 obligations, let alone all 8 of the obligations. And that's the red flag to me. So I mean, it's just everybody has to do their part. And if you all do your part, if we all do our part, the site does their part, the CRO does their part, the sponsor does their part, you may have a better chance at a good outcome, a positive outcome. I'm not 100% sure the root cause of the failures and why certain studies and this and that, but I can tell you when it comes time to clean the data and you're looking at top line tables, listings, and figures, getting ready for biostats, potentially unblinding, you really start to see the impact of these errors. And the source of the error now doesn't really matter because what do you do to fix it? And really, what should have been done to prevent it in the first place? And that lies with a shared responsibility, the topic of our call today. It takes everybody to do their part to end up on the right side of the tracks. Otherwise, money is wasted, time is wasted, therapies get shelved, they don't make it to the patients who need them. And that's pertinent to every genre of medicine. It's not just a singular portion. There's so many effective drugs that are retrospectively looked at after a phase 3 failure where they're actually if something would have been changed in the design of the study or the conduct of the study, the drug would have made it to market. It's not a matter of whether the drug works or not. It works. But because other things happen, it prevents that drug from getting to market when patients who are out there desperately need them. And it happens in every therapeutic area. And so shared responsibility is critical. So from a sponsor perspective, it's just everybody do their part. Take responsibility, take accountability. Don't point the finger. And if you find yourself having to point the finger, it's time to pull out the mirror.
I like it. So, follow-up question. So, a lot of times, if data are really, really bad, sponsors just won't pay sites, right?
You're right, Dr. Fox. Look, there's a lot of there's clauses in the CTA, the clinical trial agreement, that does say that. I mean, certain CTAs I've seen as current as current, where yes, sponsors and CROs will not pay for data they cannot use. I mean, I was at a very large CRO and we were, this went way up to the VP, almost C-level executive suite. And I'd love to say his name because he's the best. Great guy. He's no longer there, but anyways, he always taught me. I was a CTM at the time. He's like, Robert, we don't pay for data that we can't use, and that was a CRO VP talking to me. That wasn't a sponsor, right? And it's absolutely true. I mean, let me ask you a question. Are you going to pay for something you can't use? Let's just call it a vehicle. Let's call it a food you're allergic to. Like, you told a waitress or a waiter, hey, listen, I'm deathly allergic to peanuts. and he brings you something out with peanuts on it. Are you gonna pay for that dish? No, right?
So-
Or if you walk into a car dealership and you pay for a Mercedes and they drive around a Prius, you want to pay for the Prius, not for the Mercedes.
I
Well,
actually
Chris,
had that
Chris
happen.
does
Wait,
Corvette.
wait, I actually
Chris
had
does
that
Corvette.
happen. I literally had that happen at a dealership. Bought a car, worked the deal. When we went outside, there was a different car there.
Wow. Well,
Literally
so Robert,
had that
my follow-up question was, I know that we do that to sites. Does that ever happen to CRAs where like you have data lock and it's just terrible, and obviously the CRA didn't do their job? Do you not pay the CRAs?
Well, that's the, I don't, the CRA doesn't work for us as at least in my company,
Maybe
but
that's the problem.
maybe that's the problem, right? Because look,
Like there's
a-
no
what-
incentive for. I know that they're overloaded, but there's no incentive. Like for sites, there's obviously contractual incentive, but for CRAs, they get paid whether they do a good job or not, right?
and that's a problem, because you go back and you look at audit trails and you look at what was verified, what was queried, what was not queried, what wasn't verified. And there's nothing worse than seeing some data point verified by multiple stakeholders and entered by the site, yet it's so against the grain of the protocol. You're right. There's no, I mean, what's the penalty? A performance improvement plan, maybe. A kappa, maybe. But you're right. The CRA is getting paid. And the worst case scenario is they resign. The reason of separation for HR purposes cannot be disclosed to any party. They move on to the next CRO. That CRO contacts the previous CRO. Was this person employed? Yes. What was their title? CRA. What was their length of employment dates? This date to that date. And that's all the information that can be disclosed. And that's exactly what propagates the problem. Now, I'm not saying that we should disparage people and ruin reputations. No, people make mistakes. But at the other end of the spectrum, it's like, you're right. What's the penalty for me? First of all, not being on site for 8 hours. Who's going to tell? Who's going to tell on me? Sites like Dan, sites like Chris, unless you're creating and filling out these surveys, and unless you're, following up on, how long was the CRA on site? Are you satisfied with his or her performance? Did they help you? How was their attitude? And you're looking at these personable characteristics and following up on quality. Nobody knows really. So literally, I've pulled sites before and I've said, how long was this CRA on site over the course of 3 days? Come to find out, it was cumulative, maybe 12 business hours over 3 business days. And then I go to the trip report and I'm like, no wonder this person only reviewed 8 patients in 3 days when there were 65 to review. And so it's unfortunate we have to look at that level of detail. But, again, it's like, have some, why are you in this industry? Are you in it for the wrong reason? Like, I'm here for a reason. I have a mission. Dr. Fox, you share that mission. It's to bring those therapies to people who need it. I mean, you're close. This isn't something, we're not all here to, because we have nothing else better to do. Right? We're here to elicit a change. And that's why these conversations, albeit difficult, they're not fun to have, but we need to have them. All the stakeholders in this industry, none of us are angels. Sponsors make mistakes, sites make mistakes, CROs make mistakes, vendors make mistakes, but acknowledge it. Don't deflect it. Well, this is how we trained that person. This is what you told us to do. You approved it that way. Like all of that's the problem. I hear it day in and day out. You signed this waiver. You signed off on this document. It's never, you know what, we hear you, we understand, we'll fix it. If there's a fix that's needed, there's a cost associated with that fix. It's always a deflection. That's the big theme here. And I really think that dynamic has to change.
We're gonna get to some of the comments, but I have some ideas we can discuss about technology maybe helping sponsors be more hands-on. I think a lot of the issues, like sponsors are not as hands-on as they like to be. We have Ruth saying hello. We have James saying currently looking for oncology CRAs. So if anyone's feeling burnt out, give him a shout. We have Claudia, who's a Chris Somber fan. She's saying hi. Do you know this person, Chris? Or
Yeah.
oh, okay, okay. Hi, Claudia. Joshua says hello. Alfredo Alonso says that is true, Dr. Fox. Okay, here's a good one. Sorry to block you guys. They kept stating they lessened my load and it never happened. Worked 70-hour work week. I never took that out on my sites. Also was a former CRC, and the site staff loved that I was relatable, but CROs and pharma pile the workload and think we can cover all reg farm trainings, etc., and SDV in 1 to 2 days. Train other CRAs and ensure metrics are on point. Quality is expected but can't be squeezed in these tight timelines. These CRAs are given the brunt of the work, just like the coordinators, and the higher ups making all the money and the profit are okay with it until they're not okay with it, meaning money's affected somehow. I'm getting some background noise.
Yeah, there's
where-
a lot of background noise. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Hold on, let's see. Dr. Fox. Just please mute, and then when you speak, just unmute. There's like some. Thank you. But what do you think about this? Like this, and does tech help? Like as more sites shift to eSource, as more sites start adopting eReg, in theory, it's possible for sponsors to be more hands-on. We already have a few sponsors that are like, hey, and they're small. We're not going with a CRO. We're going to monitor with these tools we have. But then they're also forcing the sites that are not comfortable with eSource and all these things to use it. So that's the trade-off. It's like, okay, well, we're going to be more hands-on, but you're going to have to learn some new technology. Do you think this is good, or what do you think, guys?
I think it's good, but Dan, we've been privy to all these fancy tools forever, right? Dashboards, outputs, but I always used to say, even like 10 years ago, I'm like, this data and these graphs are only as good as the person who's entering the data. So even if you go to an eSource platform, and I love the idea, don't get me wrong, like please don't misinterpret what I'm saying here. I'm just kind of looking at the other side of this. It's only as good as the source that's being uploaded. It's only as good as the data being entered. So if there's typographical errors, if the CRC has one patient's chart and she's entering the wrong information into the eSource, I mean, there's still a lot of areas in which gaps could present themselves. So it's not a perfect solution, but nothing ever is. And we need to make a progress because we've been doing it one way for so long, and that's not effective. So I guess it just kind of, tech is great, but I think where tech is really going to shine is where it's going to be automated in the sense of signal detection, right? When a patient enters data from an ePro perspective, or a site enters data from a site patient's chart that just kind of doesn't satisfy the logic check, if you will, a text message is sent, an email is sent, and let a human triage whether action needs to be taken or not. So for me, safety signal detection in terms of just being, looking at the data, does it make sense? That's where I think it's going to really shine in conjunction with pivoting to an eSource platform. Humans inherently will always make mistakes, and you just can't comb through hundreds of thousands of lines of data and expect to catch every little problem. So that's where AI and tech is really going to come in to help us ensure that, number one, data issues are caught in real time so that we can fix it, retrain where needed. The problem is when you go 6 to 9 months later and uncover a problem, what do you do to go back to fix that problem? And I'll give you an example. You know, there's a situation where patients are using rescue medication. Many different studies use rescue medication for many different indications. And let's say you have a situation where the diary doesn't capture the time the patient took that medication. How do you, like, if I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I take a rescue medication, I should be able to enter that data immediately. But if things are not designed right from the ground up,
Hmm.
and you don't realize this until 2 years later, how do you go back
But
and fix
that's
this?
but that's a problem of a CRO that has this technology, usually, that created it and is not necessarily going to invest money into improving it as long as sponsors are okay with the current version of it. So do you think that's something sponsors are able to do going forward,
Well,
or
keep in mind, the CRO is going to always pivot back and say, well, you approved it.
exactly?
You are part of the design process. So again, it's that, it should be that symbiotic relationship. It's like, wait a minute, if I was the expert on your technology, then I wouldn't need to purchase your technology, right? However, if it, like, that's where the guidance needs to come in. It's like, well, listen, even, like, here's what you need, here's what it's going to cost, and if it's a costing issue that you're trying to reduce, and therefore you have to sacrifice certain time points, aka the time something was taken, maybe that's not such a great idea. I mean, I've worked with CROs before sending out RFPs where they're like, look, these are non-negotiable. We need this in the budget so that we can perform the following services. And if we remove these, we cannot commit to certain quality KPIs. I respect that because they are unwilling to budge. Like, this is the must have, this is the nice to have, and this is the we could go either way with it. But those must haves need to be identified. And if the sponsor is not willing to agree to those must haves, then just like Dr. Fox is rejecting sites from his network.
Hmm.
Again, I'll say, you guys, your audience might have heard me say this before. I've only ever had one CRO say to me, you know what, we may not be the right partner for you because your assumptions are just not in line with our historical database and the knowledge that we have in this indication. Like, your enrollment rate expectations and your timelines for us to deliver this study to you are just not possible.
And were they right?
They were right. They were absolutely right, Chris. But then sometimes when you work with executive management, they don't see that. They want to go with the yes man. They want to go, well, this CRO can do it. So let's, even though as an operational expert that it's not possible, those decisions are made at a much higher level. And unfortunately, influencing is just not even possible once that gets to that level. And now you're working against an unrealistic budget, unrealistic assumptions, unrealistic timelines, and you're expected to deliver within that. And then, heaven forbid, you miss it. Now you're answering to investors, you're answering to the executive team, you're blaming, this person and that person. You're desperate to bring on rescue sites. You start exploring, recruitment vendors, and it's a circus. It ends up turning into a circus when you could have looked at it from the beginning and said, listen, this is the road we need to go down, and this is what it's going to take, and this is the reality. I'd much rather be conservative and blow away those metrics than say I'm going to do something in this amount of time and then extend it double the amount of time.
Sure.
Under promise, over deliver. That's, I mean, cliche, but that's the way it is
So Dan, I
for
was
me.
thinking a lot about what you were saying, and you were asking about technology. We were going to technology, thinking how that would work. I think that we've seen in this industry that the success of technology relies on two variables. Two. The first one is, of course, the end user or the user who's inputting that data, like Robert was saying. And the second one is the process itself. And I think that we as an industry always focus on that user part. How much tech requires training? You always have to document the training. Always have to talk about that. But very few of the tech actually looks at the holistic process. So prime example, I know that Mike visited your site from VersaTrial, right?
Love that
He
guy.
went
Yes.
there. Yeah. So he went there. So again, shout out to VersaTrial for Dan. But he went there to understand that tech process for you as a site. So
Yes.
now I'm not just trying to go train a bunch of end users who are not always going to be the end users, but he's actually trying to look at the process itself as a tech company so that the site, the end user, can have a good process to work with. Goes with back to that patient. You got that patient with something they can enter their data any time of day. Well, what if that patient had to enter that data into 4 different platforms?
Exactly. Exactly right. No, Dr. Fogg, you're spot on. I think if you have headphones, it would be a lot better. It's very like faint. Uh, yeah, I know. Yeah,
I'll tell you what. So again, everyone, in case you didn't know, Springfield or Illinois got hit with really bad storms. We just lost our power and internet, so I'm doing this on a phone. It's okay. I've been here about 40 minutes, and Monica came in. If I can tag it off to Monica, I may sign off. I don't want to like reduce your quality.
you are super committed to do this in the middle of a power outage. Like, hats off to you. You've been doing so good on the sponsorship side with Monica, and I totally agree with what you just said about the vendor needing to understand the process. And you're spot on. There's so many issues. We're gonna stay on for even another hour. I know I had a hard stop. Something just changed it, so we can go a little longer if we want to get Monica's take on it as well. But thank you, Dr. Fox. We'll go live again, man. When we get some headphones or something, because I know what you're trying to say, but like it's there. It's there.
Yeah, I love
No,
Dr. Fox's insight. It's always super valuable. Stay safe out there and hope your power comes back soon.
Yeah, man. Have a good weekend, okay?
have a good weekend, Dr. Fox.
So, any other comment? Monica Cretiva? Well, so we have Dr. Fox passing the sponsorship baton to Monica. We could get to some of these comments too, but here's one. Okay, maybe this one's for Monica. Monica runs her own site. If you are a coordinator, aren't being an advocate for patients, you're doing something wrong. Heather, I completely agree. The problem, though, this doesn't solve the issue because you can justify to yourself as a site, well, this is just sponsored data. It doesn't affect the patient. So I'm not going to care about it. And at the end of the day, the sponsor's paying for it. So that solves a lot of it. I think that's the fundamental purpose of a coordinator. Like GCP says, like advocate for your patient, look out, but it doesn't solve the entire problem. There's still quality issues that won't affect patient safety that sponsors are paying for. What do you think about this, Monica? Coordinators, sites not taking enough responsibility for the quality at their site.
Well, that's a hard topic.
That's why you're here. That's why Dr. Fox left. He's like, I don't want to touch this. This is for Monica to take over.
That's a hard topic because I think it's everybody's responsibilities. 360 degrees is not just one part of the one part of the puzzle, right? Obviously, at the site, the number one priority, and actually, no, in the whole study, the number one priority is patient safety and keep them out of risk. That's why all the regulatory exists, right? And we want to make sure the patients are always safe at all moments. But this is something that is the responsibility of everybody. It's just that in the site we get to see the patient face to face. We get to explore to experience more personal on the personal level the patients, and obviously we have to educate them. We have to educate everybody at the site, and obviously the study coordinators need to know that everything they do is thinking about that, is thinking about the patient safety. Is this what I'm doing, this process, keeping the patient safe? Let's say, for example, a simple example, like if we're doing the laboratories and then you realize the laboratories expire, is that safe or not, right? It's something that may sound like is common sense, but some people can just, or some coordinators have could just say, well, this is what the expiration date say, the expiration date says that, but maybe we can still use this kit, right? And then we're exposing not just the patient but also the data. So it is a critical topic, and is something like I just mentioned before. It has to be 360 degrees. It's not
Well,
just one part.
Robert, Chris, chime in here because I don't think sites that are guilty of doing stuff like this or CROs, and Heather, I agree, you can do both, but there's a lot of sites and CROs not doing both because it's easier to just have your hand out and go through the motions than look in the details. Uh, do you think financial incentives are appropriate, like controlling the financial levers from the sponsor side and the site side
I
for
mean,
these kind of
honestly,
things?
I wish, and I've actually brought in this to legal. I would love to be able to offer incentives directly to the coordinator. But Dan, again,
Ooh, what an idea.
you and
Versatile, take notes.
but you and Chris as site owners and Monica as a site owner, you're like, wait a minute, Robert, wait a minute, sponsor. These people are my staff members. You're not going to predicate who you're going to distribute disbursements to. We do that. Like, Dan, that's like me telling you, well, you know what? I'm going to go give your CRC a $2,000 bonus for working overtime because she's spending time recruiting for this study. You're going to be like, no, that 2 grand is actually going to be paid to Yuma Clinical, and I'll be the judge of how I'm going to disperse that bonus to my coordinator. But to be quite frank with everybody on this panel, I would love as a sponsor to be able to say, you know what, coordinator, based on your performance and ensuring patient safety, ensuring data quality, we have in the contract a bonus specifically for you, and you are giving that bonus in full to that CRC. I've
I would
tried to
love that.
actually
I would love that as a site owner. Chris, what do you
see.
think?
I don't really have a comment on that. I don't, mean,
I
I don't really mean, I'm not
Chris
trying
wants
to,
that bonus. He'll say,
I'm not,
"Forget you, coordinator. I'm going to be the CRC now."
I'm not trying to hijack this train of thought, but everything since I've been on this call is just addressing symptoms, right? So ultimately, with and I'm going to sound like a communist here, but ultimately the problem is from the sponsor perspective, they're a business, and ultimately they're not going to implement anything unless they think it'll increase their bottom line. That's just the way it is.
But Chris, what about when you don't have a bottom line? Like I work for a sponsor that has no, approved products, and we are solely investor funded. So it's not like we have a viable P&L. We are working solely based on the, in the series funding that we've gone through. So
Certainly.
it's very different, but I agree with you. If there's a different, if you have a revenue stream and it's affecting your bottom line, I get it. But what's your take on situations where there is no bottom line?
Well, it's still the same principles. There's expenses that sponsors do not see a need for. They're not going to pay it, right? So unless it increases something that they deem worthwhile, they're not going to spend the dollars, like tech, right? There was a lot of conversation on tech. A lot of sponsors, they don't want to spend the money, right? Because hey, that's not going to increase our bottom line.
Right,
or
but
we have to implement this whole new procedure that's going to cost X dollars, and it's just not worth it.
Right, but giving a 2K bonus to a CRC working on my study that's noted as the lead contact for this site will increase, the value of the deliverable, presumably. I mean, if you're a CRC and you know that this certain study, like, look, guys, I want to say something, and you can disagree with me. But I love dissenting opinions. But if you're a CRC and you know you're getting a bonus from this particular study, regardless of what the PI is saying or the site owner is saying, that CRC is going to hyper focus on that study, whether it's from a recruitment perspective, patient engagement perspective, level
Yeah,
of
but
service perspective. They have skin in the game now. They know if they exceed or meet a milestone, they're going to get a direct benefit from it versus waiting for the owner or some other stakeholder to say, you know what, you've done such a great job. Here's a bonus. That's the way
well,
that I see it.
we've discussed we've discussed this before, and I don't think going to the coordinator is the way to do this. It should be based on enrollment or some other factor for the site overall. Therefore, so if a site has 14 studies, right? What's one way to make sure they pay close attention to your study? Pay them the most, right, out of the 14 studies. And if you're doing that, and they can get patients for your study, that's a big problem in research, right? They just don't have access to these patients, and somehow they get the study. But if you're paying them the most, of course, the site owner, the PI, they're gonna put a focus on your study because the money's there.
Yeah.
Right, but Chris, the problem is, and I'm not, I love the back and forth here. This is what's fun about this. But the problem with that is maybe you're paying the most right now, but that could change very quickly because sites are getting new studies, ending
Certainly.
studies at any given moment. So again, I believe, and I've said this from the day one, not only from a site advocacy perspective, but I believe coordinators are the most underpaid positions in the entire industry. And they are arguably the most valuable asset to any site. So what I'm trying to say is if you could legally allocate funds directly to a CRC, I believe it's actually more valuable and will show higher returns than giving it to the site, because I've done that before. I've given sites bonuses to meet certain enrollment milestones. But again, it doesn't push the CRC to do the pre-screening. It doesn't. There's no skin because the CRC is staying this, like they're fluid, they're stagnant, they're static. Like nothing is changing for them. And if they're gonna do extra work, if they're going to get the data in the EDC in a timely manner, if they're going to make those phone calls, if they're going to log into the portals, and they're going to, go the extra mile, it's time we as an industry start supporting that effort. And I believe it, like we have tried to, I have personally tried to allocate funds to a CRC, but
Okay,
unfortunately it was shot down.
let's
I
say
would
that.
like to say something.
Oh, we got a good topic for SOS.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
One quick
So,
comment. So let's say that
Okay.
works. Why are you not running into the same problem as paying the sites more? So now all the sponsors are paying the coordinators more, right? This is the same problem.
Yeah, but he wants to be first. He doesn't care about future studies. He
I
wants
want
his
to
first.
mention, I want to mention something because I mean, obviously, yeah, I totally agree with you that the CRCs are the most underpaid professionals on this industry, and they are probably one of the most important parts, right? However, why the CRCs are getting paid less than everybody else?
Because
What's the answer to that?
it's generally
Well,
the most entry level role.
and it's
Generally.
and it's probably a lot to do with the budgets that are being provided to the sites to operate with.
Exactly. So the sites
So,
don't have the financial gain to pay the study coordinators more, right?
but Monica,
Now,
also
if
not to interrupt you, if even if like we said with Chris said, let's say we increase the budget 20%, what like how many sites? And I'm not talking your site, Chris's
Not
site,
that way.
Dan's site.
Not the way though, Robert. Bonuses, like you said, you've done.
Okay. So then yeah, I mean, if it was structured that way, that would work. But I'm just saying,
Yes.
just paying a site a larger budget doesn't necessarily mean that money's going to make it to the CRC.
Especially
Yeah,
when it's owned by private equity. That's like,
There
thank
you
you,
go.
Robert.
okay,
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree with that too. But then if you think about the problem in the industry right now is a shortage of CRCs too. So now everybody wants to have retention. So
Right.
that's gonna create that increasement on the payment of the study coordinators. But not just that, but if we include if the sponsors accept to include bonuses or things like that in the budget, I can almost guarantee it is going to go to that specific study, and people are going to work more towards that study because it
Exactly.
makes more money for everybody, not just for
So,
one part, right?
so
So I totally agree that the CRCs need to get paid more. I totally agree that that's a very important. Obviously, the CRCs are incredibly important, but I also think the sites as a whole are very important, and everybody needs to get some sort of benefit. Because if we think about it as a whole, the industry, out of the vendors, the CROs, and everybody, who's getting paid the less? The sites.
So,
100%.
so here's the solution, which I've actually seen sponsors do, and that's they hire the coordinators, they send them to the site, and they work for the site until their study's over, just on that study. And the site has to accept the coordinator to take on the study. I've seen AbbVie do this.
So
But
Brad and
are you okay with that?
I've never had it at my site, but I've seen sites in which this occurs.
Right, but I'm asking, would you be like Monica, Dan, Chris, would you guys be okay with a sponsor saying, "Hey, we're sending this"? I can tell you
No,
AMCs,
wouldn't.
that doesn't work. Like
I wouldn't be okay
academic
with it.
medical centers, you can't do it.
I completely agree. It wouldn't work there, right? This
Right,
is
but like,
for
but Dan just
private
said he
practice.
wouldn't allow that, right? Like,
I wouldn't like it.
yeah. So Monica, I mean, would you?
Brad and Fox. Too bad they're not on because they've had people. Brad for a fact I know.
I
He's
have a
had
solution.
sponsor. He'd had sponsor hire someone to go to his site just to do data entry, and the amount of problems that caused, and then he had to clean up the mess in his situation. So there's many reasons I would say no to this as a site owner.
My
So
solution for this will be if the site has already somebody that they think is, I mean, somebody that they trust already, that they know is gonna perform well, why the sponsor don't pay for the training of that coordinator, like for
You're right.
example, to us, to the CRC Academy or any program, right? So that will be a way for the sponsor to support that site in different way and get somebody extra for that specific study, but the site already trusts that person.
Yeah.
Here's my CRC. Daisy, what's up, Daisy? Enjoy your time off. What a committed coordinator. Watching this on her day off. CRCs are at the low end in clinical research, but there's high turnover rate because not everyone can handle that kind of workload. It costs CROs more money in the long run, but then again, they have the money to throw away. Smaller sites are wiser to treat their CRCs better despite the low pay. Thank you, Daisy. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, I tell all the staff, this is not a job, this is a career. Work with me. You're gonna get stuff. You're gonna get rewarded later. Just work with me here. But not every some of these sites are private equity owned. You think they care about someone's career? No. They want a job. You enter data. You draw blood. You spin blood. Me make money. That's like the algorithm. Like, so how do you differentiate? And Monica, about the sites getting trained, like we've been offered on one study, the sponsor would pay like 10 hours a week for a coordinator, but they didn't want us to use that coordinator for other things. Like, how do they track exactly how much time they're spending? So it never worked out. That's what the sponsor told me, but they're playing with these ideas. I think it boils down to training of the at the site level. So the problem's not really a shortage of CRCs or CRAs. The problem is a shortage of training and sites and CROs not wanting to invest because there's no immediate ROI in training someone. So they rather just give them more workload to who they already have, pay them a little more. So I'm not okay with that. We always invest in new people. We hire people. Ask Daisy. We hire people when we don't need them, at me and Chris's expense. We're part owners. We'll take it. Just let's get new people in. Let's give you someone to help you enter data, get them up to speed to be a CRC. If they're not, that's fine. Go somewhere else. But we're gonna keep trying. But not every
So
site's gonna do this.
I like what Chris said. I really want to not talk about the symptoms. What's the solution here, guys and lady gals? What is the solution? Is it because I literally want to go consult some of the legal experts that I know in this industry, and I want to say, okay, fine. We should be always looking at the site budget to make sure that we remain as competitive as possible and making sure that you as sites have what you need to operate the study and conduct the study, right?
I think the solution is save our sponsors. SOS. Maybe we'll do 2 conferences a year, one for sites, one for sponsors. SOS, save our sponsors. You
But you're
guys
not
have
really
the
answering the question, Dan.
No, I am. Let me get to it.
All
You
right.
guys have the financial levers, right? Like sponsors do. Not CRO, not sites. Ultimately, the money, if you stop the money flow and you guys are all in the same effort, that people are going to be forced to change. Like, hey, we're not going to pay if there's the same deviations over and over again. We're not, I mean, I don't really know. The solutions are financial and they're from the sponsor, not from anyone else. That's
I
the
would agree with
solution.
that. I'd agree with that. It's definitely from the sponsor's perspective because, I mean, okay, the communist side of me would say, well, you throw this to big government, you make socialized medicine, and there you go.
Hell
right?
no.
Exactly.
Big government needs to stay the hell away from this.
Exactly.
FDA
Completely
needs to
agree.
stay away.
And you
NIH
kill
need to stay
R&D.
away.
You kill R&D doing that, right? If there's
Yep.
no money in it, you kill R&D. So you can't
Yep.
you can't go that route, right? And I think
Nope.
actually you have worse outcomes going that route personally. So forget that side, right? So what are the levers of control? Like Dan said, it's the sponsors. They're the ones ultimately in charge of the levers of power, which is money.
And maybe the sponsor will even pay faster if they take control of this stuff. Like the
But
biggest
so
thing
then
of
again, guys, I still have the question, not to interrupt you. If I come to you as a site owner and I'm like, listen, I want to incentivize your coordinator, your lead coordinator that you have assigned to this study, and I want to allocate $2,000 a quarter to this specific CRC. Are you okay? And how do you track that money is actually hitting that CRC's pocket?
So
Are you okay with that idea?
I'll give my opinion first, real quick. So I think really, ultimately, it goes back to the CRCs and the CRAs. I think if the sponsor trains them, employs them, sends them to the sites, they're only hiring the PIs. I think ultimately that's how it works. I think because you can dedicate the resources to the study and the PI is the ultimate one responsible at the site. There is no other employees essentially at the site, maybe other than sub-investigators. I think you could go that route, right? It would be horrible for a while, but I think ultimately that would be one solution, right? So as the sponsor is responsible for the CRAs, they're also responsible for the CRCs. That would be my thought.
I agree with Chris. And then I think the other route is obviously supporting the sites more because let's say, for example, that site has only one coordinator, right? And they have 2 or 3 studies, no more than that. But then if you're giving that coordinator that bonus, it can create a chaos also in the site because then that coordinator doesn't want to pay attention to the other studies, right? So I think the best way to go in that case is giving support to the sites, and if they want extra attention, maybe saying, okay, we will pay for the training or this extra coordinator, and giving you support through the budget so you can get an extra employee for that specific study. That's what I think it will help. And then in addition to that, sometimes I actually once proposed to a sponsor that I will have like a full on strategy for patient recruitment, including community engagement and all of that. But for that, I will need funds for that for on doing that, right? And they say no because we have a central campaign. So the sites are sometimes make the effort. They find different. The sites are very creative and find different other solutions. But sometimes we get the door closed even without giving the opportunity to explain in detail how this can help, or because they say, yeah, we don't have the funds, and usually, and I don't want to point any fingers, but sometimes it's the CROs too, right? Because they say
Mm.
we have this limit and that's it. So then we have that gatekeeper that is not helping us to keep growing or to help the study in reality.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Monica. It sounds good, when you say it, but our concern as a sponsor is even if we increase the budget X amount and meet your request, what assurance is there from a contractual perspective that that is actually going to provide the fruit that we think it is? Because oftentimes, I've in my experience, we've provided these types of incentives to the site as a whole, but it still doesn't incentivize the coordinator to do the pre-screening efforts. I mean, I've had contacts with sites, and the site's like, look, Robert, we've only gotten through the letter B, as in boy. And I'm like, wait a minute, you've been activated for 8 months and you've gotten through two letters. It's like, well, we don't have the time, and our coordinators are just busy, and they just don't have the time to pre-screen patients and look at the EMR. So that's where I'm saying, like,
Well,
and I agree with you, Monica. It's tough to, you have one coordinator, they're working across three trials, or even if you have two coordinators working across three trials, and that one coordinator who's getting a bonus, the other coordinator doesn't get the bonus, it's going to create problems at the site level. But then again, simply increasing a budget, overall budget, gives no assurance to the sponsor that that effort and that extra fund is going to create the result that we expect it to create.
no,
I
but
mean,
I
it
think
can
we're
be.
onto something.
Yeah, I think if it's included in the contract, and then on top of that, let's say now the sponsor has a monitor that goes maybe more often to review what this coordinator is doing, it could, I mean, it could improve, because now you have another set of eyes making sure that
I
everything
don't
is
think so.
working. No,
I don't think extra monitoring visit. We need to incentivize quality of data at the site level. If you
no,
just
that's
give
a
another monitoring
100%.
visit, CRO is just going to bill for the. You need to incentivize quality. You need to separate it from
Hmm.
incentivizing for enrollment, because we're already sites are already incentivized plenty to enroll. So now you need to focus on, let's incentivize for quality.
Hmm.
If the sponsor
Hmm.
takes control of the payments, I know it's a lot to do, but it might be worth it. If they control the payments, they could promise faster pay, all right?
I agree. I
But
actually.
they will discount visits based on missing things. So, hey, protocol said you needed to have recorded this time point at diary. You did not. Either you remedy it somehow, and if we accept it, we'll pay the full amount, or we will not pay you the full amount for that visit. And then if you keep repeating these things over and over, and it's that critical, we're gonna put a pause on paying you. Something similar to that. I mean, I don't have like the actual solution,
Yeah.
but sites don't need more incentive to randomize.
The
They don't.
problem is, Dan, is like when you like these are great ideas, right? But when you bring them to legal and you ask them like, is this possible? They shoot it down. And then the other part is what site owner, like I guarantee you, if I sent a contract like that to Chris, he would tell me to pound sand. I promise you. Am I
Yeah,
right,
but what
Chris?
if what if what if you promise 30-day payment from visit date, or penalty, late penalty, but in exchange we also have certain things that we're going to penalize you on if we don't get what we want. And
Mhm.
I,
because what the biggest issue with sites is not getting our payments. Like what, six
yeah.
months,
Hmm.
9 months. So if we
Hmm.
get paid in 30 days, as long as we follow the protocol, we're going to make damn sure that our coordinators are collecting all the data. If that means redoing our process, fine. And if certain sites say no, okay, let them go work with the big CROs and wait for payments 9 months.
Maybe
Yeah,
right.
I don't know if you Chris and Dan remember that we had in the past a study that offered us like a big bonus if we screen patients within the first month of
Yeah,
studying the site.
yeah, and guess
And
what? We all
and
did.
that happened. It happened
Yeah.
because everybody wanted the bonus.
What about those
Yeah.
rapid startup bonus? Hey, five
Mhm.
grand if you could get IRB approval in a month.
Exactly.
We are making
Mhm.
sure we don't
Yeah.
care what our SOP is.
Mhm.
We're making
Yeah.
sure that IRB is
Mhm.
getting
Yeah.
approved. So
And then, yeah, I have a sponsor study right now that they have a CRO for the monitors, but they are taking care of the payments and the budget negotiation and everything. And they have been, I mean, it has been such a great relationship with, I mean, at least with my site, and then I know another site that has the same study, that everybody's super motivated with this sponsor, and everybody's giving a lot. Even the sponsor, they went to visit the majority of the sites with the medical monitor and the study director, and they were talking and really helping the sites and giving support that the sites needed. Every site is different, right? Some sites need support in different areas than others, but they did these visits, and their recruitment improved so much. So I
well,
think that's
yeah,
also important that the sites and the sponsors have that relationship, that closeness, so they understand the
Chris.
problems more in detail.
Chris is thinking about a lot. But Chris, how does a sponsor forget a CRO? How does a sponsor effectively incentivize quality from the site? I don't suspect enrollment needs to be incentivized. Sponsors are digging down the wrong hole. Sites are plenty incentivized if they agree to a budget to randomize. So quality needs to be incentivized, right?
So that
How do you improve that?
so the budget part, that's not always true, Dan. Um, we've actually taken on studies at sites in which recruitment activities were very difficult, and the budget just wasn't there to incentivize us to do so. Uh,
Okay, 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 but okay. So let's
so
separate
that's not
that.
always the case. I would say 75% of the time you're correct, though. The budget's there.
Okay, so let's focus on 75. It still would be a huge improvement if 75% of the time we can figure out a way to incentivize quality from the sponsor side. Financial
From the
levers,
site side, right? Quality from
yes.
the site side.
Sponsors have the financial levers. We're gonna do a save our sponsors conference.
Again, I still think the sponsor should, I mean, they're responsible for everything, right? From
Right.
a money perspective. So why
So
not
why do they
hire?
allow CROs to pay? Why don't
Why
they
not hire?
control that part?
I don't understand. So again, I think if they want quality, they take full responsibility for it and train and hire the coordinators and dedicate this coordinator to this site. I agree with what Robert said. I think initially there will be a lot of hesitation towards that because I would be hesitant.
I would be
But
hesitant too.
yeah, but ultimately, I think they have full control then.
Would
Yeah,
you
the
rather
CRAs
take
and the
that?
coordinators.
Yeah, but then you're gonna have think of your site owner. Every sponsor does this. You don't have employees. What are you doing then?
What you do, you have the PI, right? Because what are the hurdles in research, right? It's recruitment is the hurdle, right? So you have a coordinator there working in conjunction with the CRA and the sponsor, dedicated to this one study. Ultimately, that's all they're going to do is focus on recruitment for that
Well,
study. There will be no other focus.
Robert's example of our colleague that we all know from another study that's having issues. There's not recruitment's not the issue. It's quality of the data.
Okay, so okay, take that example, right? Again, you're employing the CRA and the CRC. If there's an issue with quality, okay, let's hire another coordinator. They're enrolling too much. Now, again, the sponsor's going to have to pay more money, right? But if this site is enrolling more than, let's say they're higher enrollers, right? They're one of the high enrolling sites. Well, send two coordinators there to work on the study. Again,
Do
you're
you
going to have
think which one's more practical from a sponsor legal perspective and from a site adoption? This having a stranger in your office working for you, or having penalties for sites on a visit by visit basis with On the other side of that coin, you transparent payments and you get paid fast. Even 2 weeks.
Guys, I've heard just
That
like
would be good, Monica.
I love Chris's idea. I do, but it's just I don't know the viability of site. Like what the likelihood of them like
Oh,
uptaking this is going to be such a
it's
fight.
so
It's going to be a battle. They're going to be like, "Are you crazy?
I
You're going to
completely
send,
agree. Sites
you know,
aren't
yeah,
going to do it.
yeah,
Sites
the
aren't going to
sites
do
are."
it.
And then
But
Chris,
I'm just
doesn't
saying,
it?
I think
But
that's the solution, but I don't think sites will do it.
right, but doesn't that impact your business in a sense? Or does
Yeah,
it
sure.
reduce
You got,
or does it reduce your overhead and it's a positive for you, you sell it that way?
I think it's both, right? I think in certain situations, I think it'll actually increase profitability at certain sites, and other sites are going to lose money. I don't think there's just one shoe fits all, right? I think it differs from site to site. But I agree with you. I think 80% of sites will say absolutely no to this. But where you will get acceptance is from research naive sites,
Right.
right? Which now
And then Chris, they're gonna poach those those CRCs and make them permanent
that's
employees.
part of your contract. That's part of your contract. They
Yeah.
can't do that, right?
No, I hear
But that would be an approach. Just start working with research naive sites on this exclusively, right? So maybe
Yeah,
you
you're
still
not
work with experienced sites and you don't do this with them. But for research naive sites, you send your own coordinators there that the sponsor is responsible for. Um, I think that actually works thinking about it, because that's the hesitancy of doctors is I don't know what I'm doing and I don't want to risk my medical license. Well, hey, guess what? We're going to send a coordinator to your site that we've trained, maybe a former CRA or that was a coordinator too, and they're going to be paid just as a CRA would be paid. So they're happy to do it, right? They don't have to travel, something local to them. I think that would work, honestly.
You know, Chris, I would love for us to talk about this at SOS. So, you know, again, for everybody, I can't wait for SOS. I bought my ticket. I'm going to be there for sure. But Chris, this is where the paradigm has to shift.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It not only enables green sites to get their foot in the doors and have, you know, they have a viable PI, they have a viable patient database, and they want to do all this kind of stuff. You know, that would be phenomenal, and what an opportunity for all stakeholders to benefit from something like this. But I mean, I think it's going to take a major dialogue, and it's going to have to be a shift away from networks that have predominated and dominated this industry, and they charge millions of dollars to get access to these networks. And I mean, you're right. You know, if I send and I take accountability for vetting the staff member, the coordinator, the CRA, and they're going in and understanding they have skin in the game and they're going to protect the patient safety, protect the PI's license. This PI has a sense of comfort that we have qualified, trained people coming in to review this. You're absolutely right. That is a viable solution that would benefit all parties. It's just a matter of getting people to accept it. And then the whole AMC portion of this is, you know, I wouldn't even know how to get around
that's
that.
a lost cause. Well, we need just like DCTRA.
The solution is that you don't implement anything, right? So you're running your own study within your study, right? What works better, right?
Yeah, but which small biotech has money for that?
That's true too.
Yeah, none.
So only the big ones can do.
Yeah, it would be Pfizer, it would be Johnson & Johnson.
I think the money, and Pfizer and Johnson could care less, like about the data.
They care about their bottom line.
They care about the bottom line, but if they have enough studies going on, they can make tweaks. They can afford to do another study because the FDA said, well, we didn't like the way the data came out. It still ends up costing them less than figuring out how to change their entire process. I think just like the DCTRA, whatever the Alliance for Decentralized Clinical Trial, if they can pass guidance to allow strangers to see your patients, like in another office, how could small sponsors, not create a similar alliance? I know there's competition and stuff, but there's incentive for them to do this, to figure out ways. Let's figure out how we can pay sites better, but also take some control of our money, to where if we're not getting the data that we agreed we'd be getting, we have some method of
Yeah, would
protecting
you agree
ourselves.
to that as a site? I wouldn't. So you're gonna find me? No.
Yeah.
I'm not
Would
going
you?
to be doing-
Would you if you were guaranteed payment direct deposit in 2 weeks from a visit?
Nope. That would have no bearing on whether or not I would agree to something.
So you'd be
Sure.
willing to wait 6 to 9 months for the same money?
No, you don't wait 6 to 9 months.
Sometimes you do.
No, you don't. I mean, Dr. Fox gave an example of a dry ice invoice. Yeah, that's like $60.
Yeah, but I'm talking regular visits. Like
Yeah,
it's
you
been
don't wait-
taking
no.
like 3-4 months to get paid sometimes.
No, yeah, that's not 6 to 9.
Okay.
I have no issues with quarterly payment. I know a lot of times the contracts say monthly and it turns out to be quarterly. I honestly don't take issue with that because now if I'm a news site, maybe, and maybe I'd be more willing to play that game, right, where I'll take fines because I need the money. But if I'm an established site that I have no problems getting studies, yeah, hell no, I'm not playing that game.
But what if it becomes the new norm to where it's like sponsors?
Well, if it's the new norm, then I have to play the game if I want to continue doing research. But it's not, right? So initially,
Right.
that I will not agree to that, and I'm going to speculate that most experienced sites are not going to agree to that. So then it's back to the sponsors are only working with research naive sites primarily.
Yeah. Is that a bad thing?
No, if they hire the coordinators.
Maybe there's multiple solutions here, guys. What do you think about save our sponsors? You like this idea? Not to give us more businesses to work on, but
I like the idea. I mean, it's I think sponsors, quite frankly, are taking advantage of left and right, and everybody thinks that sponsors have some sort of a printing press and unlimited resources, which is, not really true. Some sponsors, I think the way to look at it, can handle $100 million loss better than others, where where they just kind of brush it off and keep going.
yeah.
Or they, not to mention any specific sponsors, but they pause a study in the middle of conduct and close it down. They can afford that type of a loss. Do they enjoy it? Of course not. Does it impact the company? Sure it does. But compare that same loss to a small emerging biotech. That's a tough pill to swallow, guys.
Certainly. But that makes sense financially from the sponsor perspective. They do that midterm data analysis and find out, hey, this drug doesn't work for what we thought it would. That makes sense for everybody, small or large, right?
Sure.
Don't throw good money after bad.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things to discuss. We have Denise said site staff will end up receiving a box of donuts from that budget increase. Quality of data needs to start with employee knowledge, experience, and training. I've seen people with bachelors that lack knowledge and experience. When coming into research, starting at a site and working your way up is the best way. Education doesn't always trump experience.
Sure.
The love of money keeps us wanting more sooner than we deserve and causes data integrity. And
Well
Daisy
said.
says the famous pizza party. So yeah, everyone's got points here, and
I brought you burritos, Dan.
chili pepper is bomb. That was before Daisy got there too. Chili pepper is amazing, but there's a lot of way. Like there's not every site's the same, not every sponsor's the same. Like you can't compare our colleague small biotech with Pfizer, just like you can't compare Yuma Clinical Trials with Velocity Research or whatever that new SMO is that's huge, PE backed. Like there's no way. Or Johns Hopkins. Like you can't treat them all the same, but there could be strategic pockets of like collaboration, I think, amongst small and big. And maybe there's something there. I don't know. Just putting stuff out there, but any other thoughts, guys, on this topic, or we just call it a day?
Well, I love the discussion. I think there's a lot of, a lot of change. So like when I go to legal and I say, hey, I have this idea, Robert, the best we can do is a $50 Amazon gift card. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like that is so far away from what I wanted to do.
Send it to Daisy. She'll do it. She'll love that. Daisy, let's go.
So I think it all, we need to be trailblazers in a sense and change the norm. These standard templates that are used are ancient. They're really not up to, currency. And until somebody's willing to take a risk and sites are willing to,
Mm.
sign those unusually worded contracts with these clauses, and or the dynamic changes, we're going to be stuck in the circular go around pattern, and we're just going to keep going around the revolving
Well,
door.
I think there's something into the strategic partnership. So small sites, small sponsors, they have one thing in common is that both, I would say, care a little bit more about every dollar that's being spent because they're concerned with growing and developing talent. There seems to be an inflection point for both sites and sponsors where you get to a place where you're more concerned about protecting what you already have versus growing and improving. And this is where you start seeing complacency. You start seeing people not care so much about their employees. Like, who's gonna care more about? Let's take Daisy. She's my CRC. Me and Chris own Yuma Clinical Trials. Let's say Daisy, we get her up to be site director, right? Then we get acquired by some PE group. They come in and say, okay, Daisy, we'll make you site director, but there's really nothing further for you. They're not going to tell her that, but their actions are going to be like, okay, you're stuck now. Whereas with a small company, she has like unlimited potential to grow, whether with us or another company. So sponsors are the same. Like they get to a point where they no longer care so much about the details. As long as they protect their market share, they can make up for it with more money so that they can just, if we need to, do another study, Robert, and that's it.
Yeah, for those that have approved products, and like that's why well, I shouldn't say a specific name, but certain companies get approvals every week. It's like, oh, we got approval this week of this one. It's like,
Yeah.
and how many small biotechs do you see in that same wheelhouse?
Very few. They get
Very,
acquired by
very
the big
few.
ones if they're
And
promising.
the product is shelved because they
Mhm.
don't want to be that profit margin, that revenue stream. Heaven forbid there's competition and there's a new superior product out there that would benefit patients. It's man, it's a shame because I really see it. It's profits over patients, and it should not be that way. Our healthcare system, just look at healthcare, right? Why do insurance companies require an x-ray followed by an MRI when you can just go straight to the CT? You're putting the patient through the ringer on the healthcare side, just like you're putting them through the ringer on the research side, you
Mm.
know? Um, and it's got to change. It's got to change, for diversity, for inclusion. And it's funny because I remember, I don't remember, I think it was Brad who said this one time, Hightower, where he's like, it's funny because all the off-label use and all of the patients that this drug is going to be prescribed to, 99.9% of them would never have met the inclusion and exclusion criteria to even enroll in the study. Yet they're the ones taking this drug. It's kind of true, right? Like,
Exactly. They're the real world patients.
there you
Heather
go.
says they don't want to be upstaged and cut into their bottom line for a treatment over the cure. Well, now we're close to getting in YouTube banned territory, which
Exactly.
I just got out of. I'm free. I'm free. There's a lot of issues here. I think innovation comes from the smaller companies, whether they're sites or sponsors. I think the bigger ones could care less because they use the money. They use the money to innovate for them, basically, which is another resource that they have. So you got to be scrappier when you're smaller and pay attention to smaller things, I
Yep.
guess.
I think to close it out, Dan, the point here is that we all need to work together. We need to stop pointing the fingers. We need to stop deflecting responsibility, start taking accountability. And when the sponsor's wrong, admit you're wrong. When the sites are wrong, admit you're wrong. When the vendor's wrong, admit you're wrong. When the CRO's wrong, admit you're wrong. Let's stop, making
But
each other.
legal is gonna tell you not to admit you're wrong ever.
Well,
Don't
of
say
course,
nothing. Don't say
of course.
nothing, Dan. Robert, don't say anything.
Keep it closed. Keep it closed. Never admit to anything, right?
There you go.
never admit to anything.
The
But you know,
opposite of what you just
yeah,
said.
it really. And that's why we're in. That's why we have the issues we have, right? Because
Yeah.
it's never someone's fault, and that's why I said earlier, if you have to keep pointing the finger north, east, south, and west, pull out a mirror and start looking in the mirror because maybe it's you. Just maybe. Just maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. Just
Chris,
maybe.
any final closing remarks? I know you're very passionate about this topic. Thank you for joining us.
I don't know about passionate, but I have thoughts, that's for sure. No, I mean, I think there's all kinds of issues. The biggest issues are probably from a sponsor's perspective, obviously quality and recruitment, right? I don't know, better site selection, more control over
tried that.
staff.
They tried all this stuff.
No, they haven't. Not better control over the site staff, right? I've never seen a sponsor fully implement all coordinators will be controlled by us. Right? We're employing them directly. I've never seen that.
The
As a
reason you
side
haven't
owner?
seen it, Chris, is because you would tell us what are you, crazy?
Yes, you would. That's why I said you have to try with research.
One of your
You have to
employees.
try with research naive sites because they would be open to this.
Well, you
Right.
know what though? That opens a new can of worms because aren't there laws against sponsors having interaction with patients in the study? So it's a sponsor employee seeing.
They already do this though, Dan. I've seen it.
Yeah, they do that. I mean, Dan, there's certain biotechs out there that only they do everything in-house. They have their own CRO. It's no different than a large sponsor who has, their own internal teams that do everything. They literally do not use CRO services
So
at all.
will we
Not
get
only
to a
that, we
day
gotta
where?
own the sites sometimes. I mean,
So will we get to a day where it's truly decentralized to the point where there's no CROs or anything and just sponsors doing studies themselves?
I hope so. I'll say it.
Time to be a sponsor, guys.
I mean,
Time to
it's
be a
just,
sponsor.
I hope so. But probably, again, it's until the new generation works its way up the ladders to the C-suites, and you have that ability to make those decisions and restructure towards that internalization goal of doing everything in-house. CROs aren't going anywhere, man. They're profitable machines that are just dominating and just have incredible control and influence. It's wild. I mean, why do the largest top 5, top 10 largest pharmas still work with all 5 of them? The top 5 large CROs, like why? They can afford to have internal resources. If a small cap biotech who just got their first approval, I'll just say in the psychiatric realm, if they can do it and internalize everything, why can't large do it? It's because those OGs at the top, man.
Well, they're being told, hey, protect what you have, defer
Yeah.
liability, even if it costs more and it costs money and efficiencies, you're protecting our downside as far as the liabilities are
And
concerned.
guys, if it's not broke, why are you fixing it, right? They're still winning approvals every week.
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, I would go so far as to say smaller biotechs are less likely to work with CROs. The larger they get, the more likely they're to work with CROs.
But why
At
is
least that's
that,
my
Chris?
experience.
It's true. I'm seeing it. Yeah. We're
Yeah.
seeing it.
But I'm just wondering, like, why is that? Is it because that's what just the industry dictates? Is it because operating expenditures internally are too high?
That's got to be it, right? It's
But when I look at a
From a
budget, when I look at a budget from these CROs, it to me that's not the answer, because it's like, wait a minute, I can have a 50-person headcount for a quarter of a budget of what it costs to outsource those same services.
So I think that has to be just from the standpoint of a business, and what your ultimate goal is to make money and pay your investors, right? So otherwise you can get sued, right?
Yeah.
Not to go political too much, but Bud Light's currently being sued because of what they're doing, right?
Right.
So if you're not appeasing your investors, your stockholders, if you're not making good financial decisions for your company, you're liable to be sued and lose, right? So ultimately, there has to be a financial reason why they go with CROs. Now, if you're a foreign sponsor, I think that makes a lot of sense to go with a CRO, right? So if you're who's foreign, Bowringer, right? Right? Doesn't it make sense to hire a CRO in the USA?
They're also private, so they're like a bad example because they're a huge one that's private. But like
Okay.
AstraZeneca or
Are they
Novartis.
Novartis? Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Or is Otsuka? They're traded, right? Publicly
Yeah,
traded.
yeah.
Okay, so these foreign companies, it makes sense for them to go with CROs. Now, somebody that's located in the United States, Johnson & Johnson, right? An American company. Why do they go with CROs? Again, I think ultimately it has to do with the bottom line somehow. But I agree with you. I mean, CROs charge, excuse my French, shitload of money. So
For the big ones, though, isn't it in their incentive, the big pharma, to keep cost high, to keep new entrants, like slow down new entrants? It's like climbing the ladder and kicking it when you get up.
is it? I don't know. Maybe.
That's how
Maybe.
regulations get put in place in other industries, not just ours.
I think that it would make more sense from a large sponsor's perspective to put more regulations in place to make it difficult and burdensome, not necessarily make it costly from hiring CROs. I don't think that's the solution to keeping small players out. I think it's regulations, which certainly they have the staff in place since they're the ones that are lobbying for these regulations. They have the staff in place to deal with those regulations.
Well, boys, we'll get canceled. But thank you for another great episode. This was like really good, and we got a call soon. So everybody, go follow Robert LinkedIn underneath this video. If you're listening, thank you first of all. LinkedIn in the show notes, and then Chris. I don't know, just get through
Hello,
me.
everybody.
I guess.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, Chris, he can give his email address, or he just doesn't want to be contacted. He has too many contacting him.
This is true.
Yeah, so better off not connecting with Chris, but Robert, yes. All right. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.